Hello everybody, welcome back to a new video. Today we're in Louisville, Kentucky, and this is a cold and rainy day at Cave Hill Cemetery. Now this is a massive cemetery, there's a lot of really notable people buried here, but today we're here for one person specifically. If you enjoy a good chicken dinner, you probably have been to KFC. Now this is going to be the final resting place of Colonel Harland Sanders. Now, Colonel Sanders was born Harland David Sanders. He was born September 9th of 1890 in Henryville, Indiana. Now, we all know him as the face of KFC. His face is on the famous chicken bucket, and I actually had some KFC before coming to this cemetery. Now, Colonel Sanders did a lot with his life. He was an interesting guy. He held a number of jobs, but he had a hard time hanging on to those jobs. He wasn't the type of guy that could work for somebody else very easily. He had a lot of different jobs early on. He was a steam engine operator. He was an insurance salesman. He operated a filling station, and he was best known for selling his fried chicken. He had a roadside restaurant in North Corbin, Kentucky during the Great Depression. People loved his chicken. He had a secret recipe, and he had a patented method of making chicken in a pressure fryer. And the interesting thing is that even today, that secret recipe is not known. Now, if you follow Kentucky Fried Chicken on Twitter, this is just a random fact, they only follow a couple of people. They follow the Spice Girls, and they follow several different men named Herb, and that's to represent the herbs and spices that go into KFC's recipe. If you don't believe me, go ahead and check it out. I'll wait. Well, maybe not that long, but he was an interesting character. Now, one of his first jobs was he worked for the railroad, and he became a fireman, a steam engine stoker is what they called him, and he started doing this at the age of 16. He worked the job for nearly 3 years, and he was eventually fired for insubordination. Now, this was not the first time this happened to Harland Sanders. He found work for another railroad company, and he ended up getting fired for brawling with a colleague. Now, during this time, he was also studying law, and he ended up going to Little Rock, and he was practicing law, and he did that for about 3 years. He earned enough in fees for his family to eventually move with him. He was married by that time, had a few kids, and his legal career ended after a courtroom brawl with his own client, and his reputation was pretty much destroyed. This was pretty much a low point for Sanders. He had a lot of fails early in life. He was known as being very bullheaded, had a lack of self-control, very impatient man. He was a guy that was probably meant to be his own boss, realistically, and he ended up doing just that. But before that, he got a job selling life insurance, and he was eventually fired from that job also for insubordination. At the age of 30, he found his first success. He established a ferry boat company, which ended up being a pretty good venture. But he did cash out and sell his shares of the company, and he ended up working at kind of a steady stream of other odd jobs for a while. Now, in 1930, things started to change for him. The Shell Oil Company offered Sanders a service station in North Corbin, Kentucky, basically rent-free in return for paying the company a percentage of his sales. Now, Sanders started to serve chicken dishes and other meals, and he started serving customers in adjacent living quarters before opening up his restaurant. Around this time, Sanders was involved in a shootout with a guy named Matt Stewart, and Matt Stewart was a local competitor, and it was over the repainting of a sign directing traffic to Sanders Station. Now, Stewart killed a Shell employee who was with Sanders at the time. He was convicted of murder, and he basically eliminated himself as Sanders' competition. Now, Sanders was commissioned as a Kentucky colonel in 1935 by Kentucky Governor Ruby LaFoon. Over time, his popularity increased, and in 1952, Sanders franchised his secret recipe, Kentucky Fried Chicken, for the first time, and the first operator was in South Salt Lake, Utah, and he was the operator of one of the city's largest restaurants. Over the next 10 years, everybody was starting to learn about KFC, and it expanded to over 600 locations. And it became kind of overwhelming. Colonel Sanders at the time was aging. He was 73 years old, and he sold the Kentucky Fried Chicken Corporation for $2 million to a partnership of Kentucky businessmen. Even after selling Kentucky Fried Chicken, Colonel Sanders stayed on, and he was the brand ambassador. He was the name and the face behind the company. In June of 1980, Sanders was diagnosed with acute leukemia, and he died in Louisville at the Jewish hospital of pneumonia 6 months later. Now, this was on December 16th at the age of 90 years old. Now, this is the final resting place of Colonel Harland Sanders and his wife Claudia, and she passed away December 31st of 1996, and she was 94 years old. Now, by the time of Sanders' death, there was an estimated 6,000 KFC outlets in 48 countries with $2 billion in sales annually. Now, on the bottom, here's a tribute to his wife, Claudia Ellen Sanders. It says, "Truly the Colonel's lady." But this is a beautiful final resting place. And there will be a lot more coming up from this cemetery. There are a lot of really interesting people buried here. But that's all I have for today. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.